Did someone say something heretical? The job of the Inquisitor was to look into allegations of heresy, false conversions, witchcraft, and other severe matters. Inquisitors were clergymen of the Catholic Church, granted the position by the Pope. They would travel throughout Christian lands to investigate claims against the accused. According to records from Inquisitors, most of the time, the accused were found to have committed no wrong. However, if an Inquisitor found someone guilty of the alleged sin, he would give them a penance like fasting or going on a pilgrimage. If they refused, then he would work with secular and church authorities to have the person punished. These punishments varied, but the most severe was being burnt at the stake. The Peacock Trainer was a rare profession. Peacocks were expensive birds and found in the courts of many kings. The trainer taught the birds tricks to entertain the nobility. Peacocks were also raised to be eaten. Regarded as one of the worst jobs, Gong Farmers collected and disposed of human excrement and urine. They often worked at night as people didn't want to see cartloads of human waste coming down the street. Cesspits to dump the waste were located on the outskirts of town. Some of these farmers died from the fumes or falling into the waste. Gong Farmers could become wealthy as they sold the urine to leather tanners and other trades. The Runemaster was a skilled craftsman who would carve runic letters into stones. Rune stones recorded names of cities, directions, graves, and other records. Most runes were carved by everyday people, but many rune stones have signatures from a craftsman. Over 100 of these Runemasters have been identified from their Viking Age runestones. Although runestones are associated with paganism, over 50% of them had Christian inscriptions, like prayers and crosses. A peddler was a traveling salesman. Some peddlers carried more practical products, while others had unique and exotic items. They were part of a larger trade system throughout Europe that even connected to the Far East. Spices, foreign clothes, and finished products could be found in a peddler's cart. A pardoner or quester was a medieval preacher who raised money for religious works. Pardoners were usually monks or priests instead of higher ranks like a bishop. Many of them earned a bad reputation for tricking townspeople with fake relics and misleading indulgences. Some pardoners became quite wealthy from these schemes. For example, the German Dominican friar Johann Tetzel was known for writing phony indulgences and greatly profiting from being a pardoner. This type of job was abolished by Pope Pius IV in 1562. A jester was an entertainer employed by kings and nobility. Their main job was to amuse with jokes, music, storytelling, acrobatics, and satire. Jesters wore colorful costumes and often carried a mock scepter called a bauble. They used humor to comment on politics or court matters, sometimes even mocking their employer. Some jesters became political advisors, personal friends of the king, and wealthy landowners. Itinerant jesters traveled and performed in towns or markets. A hermit was a religious person who withdrew from society and lived a solitary existence. Many of the early medieval hermits did not belong to a religious order. In the 5th century, St. Simeon Stylites lived for many years on top of a column. In the 12th century, St. Simon Stock lived in a hollow tree for a large part of his youth. Just because you wanted to be left alone didn't mean it would happen. St. Anthony the Great found solitude in a Libyan desert, but was often interrupted by fellow Christians seeking advice and guidance. For some medieval people, working on a galley, a ship propelled by oars, was by choice, while others were enslaved. Pirates often did the enslavement. The galleys were cramped and usually dark. It was a tough physical job. Many died from dehydration, disease, and exhaustion. Bodies were thrown overboard and new slaves replaced the old ones. At the Battle of Lepanto in 1527, over 15,000 Christian slaves were freed from the Ottoman ships. A printer's devil was a young apprentice in a printing shop who performed jobs like mixing tubs of ink and fetching type. You could recognize a printer's devil because their hands would be stained black from the dye. The origin of the term printing's devil is unclear, but it might be derived from the story of a demon named Titavilis who stole letters from the printers, causing typos. A famous typo from a 1631 King James Bible stated, "Thou shalt commit adultery." Eventually, a printing's devil could be promoted to running the printing machines or even owning a print shop. Why sift through the dirt for tiny flakes of gold when you could just create it? The alchemists blended practical techniques with philosophy and religious beliefs. They would try to transmute base metals into gold. Alchemists also tried to make the elixir of life, a potion that would give you good health. There were many famous alchemists like Roger Bacon, Nicholas Flamel, and St. Albert Magnus. Although alchemists were not able to create gold, they set the foundation for modern chemistry with their techniques. The job of a town crier was to proclaim news, laws, and royal decrees in town. They would often ring a bell or bang a drum to gather attention before speaking. This job was necessary because many people could not read well, and it was a fast way to bring people news. Many centuries later, the newspaper would replace the town crier. Another form of the town crier was a herald. He was an official messenger from the king. Heralds wore a surcoat with a coat of arms of the king. They served a role similar to modern-day diplomats. The job of the executioner was to legally kill a person who was condemned. Once given a warrant authorizing the executioner would kill the condemned by hanging or beheading. The sword that they used was sharp on the edge, but flat on the end. They were often shunned because of the nature of their work. This in part explains why an executioner wore a hood to cover his face. The job was sometimes passed down through the family, as few wanted to become an executioner. An Ostiary was a medieval doorman. Their job was to guard the entrance of a church, monastery, castle, or important buildings. In some areas, an Ostiary was called a dog whipper, as they would have a broom or whip used to chase away stray dogs or animals. At Aachen Cathedral, Emperor Charlemagne gave his Ostiaries expensive silk clothes and instructions to allow no animals in, as they were considered unclean. The alewife was a woman who brewed and sold ale. This popular type of alcohol spoiled quickly, so it had to be made locally. It was a cheap and easy to make product, so many women throughout England were alewives. You had to be a married woman to sell ale, and the prices were regulated by law. By the 15th century, advancements in brewing, large-scale operations, and the Black Plague had changed the industry, leading to the decline of the alewife. The cupbearer was a trusted servant and court official. It was a high-ranking position, often the role of a nobleman. He would serve drinks to the king and nobility. He would taste the drink first to make sure it wasn't poisoned. The cupbearer had the confidence of the king and would be influential in court politics. In Tudor England, lead mining was a tough job. The miners worked in a cold cave by candlelight, striking a long chisel with a hammer into the rock wall. Heavier rocks had more lead in them compared to lighter rocks. Once the rocks with lead ore were collected, they would be added to the top of a carefully built fire with a pit underneath. The lead rock would heat up, become molten, and drip down into the pit below. The lead would be heated again and molded into ingots. These lead ingots would be sold and used for projects like stained glass windows and cathedral roofs. Even if you earned a good living as a miner, long-term inhalation of lead dust could cause a severe illness. A mourner was paid to cry and act sad at a funeral. This was a profession that went back to the ancient world. It was especially popular in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. People wanted mourners at their funeral who would cry, scream, and rip at their clothes. It made their death seem even more important. The wealthy were the primary buyers of this service. These mourners would walk through the town crying and screaming as they announced the death of the recently departed. They would also follow behind the funeral procession. Mourners often wore black clothes, but this practice varied throughout Europe. Although the practice has largely died out, it still happens in many parts of the world.